Alright, so if you've clicked on this video, you probably know what this thing I'm holding is. This, for anyone who doesn't know, is the Line 6 HX Stomp XL. This is essentially the Line 6 Helix in the new, larger Stomp format. So it's basically a Helix you can put on your pedal board, integrate with other pedals, and so on and so on. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about what this is because, you know, you guys already know. In a nutshell, this is an amp simulator, multi-effect, and an entire rig in a box. Now, one thing the Helix has become very well known for is its ability to recreate some really cool high gain sounds and give you some very technical sort of signal chains and all sorts of other cool things like that. If you're a player who loves getting techie with things, the Helix or any of the HX edition pedals is a fantastic addition to your rig. But what about those guys who want something a little more rustic, rough and ready, and simple? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this video. We're going to talk about the HX Stomp and its ability to function as a blues pedal. So can this thing play blues well? Can we dial in some convincing and usable blues tones? Let's find out. So before we start digging into some of the blues tones in the HX Stomp XL, I do have to say this is a sponsored video. Line 6 are paying me to create this video, and they've provided me with the Stomp XL for the purpose of making this video as well. So everything you're going to hear in this video today is actually all built into this unit already. So I've created 3 different presets with a bunch of different tones inside of each preset. So if you're interested in any of those presets, there's a link down below in the description where you can get those from my website as well. So if you have a HX Stomp or any of the Helix product line, go check out those patches if you want them. They are down below linked for your use as well. All of the components are built into this already, so you should just be able to drag and drop them, providing your Helix is updated with the latest firmware, of course. I've not used any external IRs or anything else. Everything is in the Helix already. So we're going to explore 3 different presets that I've created, and as I said, there's a couple of different tones you can use within each of the presets. Each one has like an overarching sort of use. So I've created one which is a good sort of clean blues platform. So if you're playing your sort of Stevie Ray Vaughan, your John Mayer style stuff, that's a good starting point. There's one that's based on a cranked Tweed sound. So if you want to get into that sort of late 60s, early 70s British blues thing with the Derek and the Dominoes kind of vibe, that's a good place for that one. And I've also done one which is like a sort of cranked Bluesbreaker vibe, which is like, you know, that 60s Marshall thing. So great for Hendrix, Clapton, Zeppelin, and all these sort of British blues revival artists as well. So everything you hear in the video is going to be coming just straight from the HX Stomp. I'm going into the input with a guitar and out of the mono output straight into my Focusrite audio interface. So all the amps and cab sims you hear are coming from the Helix as well. So now I'm going to plug this thing in and we'll get started. So we're going to be hearing tones from all 3 patches with a combination of 2 different guitars. So the single coil tones you hear are going to come courtesy of my Schecter Nick Johnston Traditional. So the first preset we're going to start with is the preset that I've called Clean Blues. So this preset, I've gone for that sort of high headroom, clean John Mayer, Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of vibe. This is a great platform for solid clean tones, but also a platform to stack other pedals up on top of. So I based this loosely off my real life rig, which uses a super clean high headroom amp, and I just stack different drive pedals on top of that to get my sound. This for me is always a really useful and versatile style tone to have, especially in a multi-effects like this, because this patch is something I could just take to a gig and I've got all the tones I probably need for most gigs in one bank of patches. So the amp you're hearing in this patch is the Line 6 Litigator model, which is their sort of take on a Dumbley style boutique amp. There's also a reverb which isn't accessible via the foot switches. I've just got that on another block afterwards because that never gets switched off for me. And also at the end of the chain, I've got the LA Studio Comp, which is like a studio style compressor just to give a nice fat and level sound. So in the front of this, I've got 6 different foot switches, and across each of the 6 foot switches, there are different things assigned. So we've got this foot switch here, which is the blue comp. So that is just a regular compressor that is first in the chain. That's on all the time, as is the second one, which is the Minotaur, which is their take on a clon. So I've got that just set to like a clean boost. So if I turn these 2 things off and then back on, pretty subtle, but it just gives a little bit more presence to the sound and a bit more fatness. This foot switch up here I've actually got assigned to the output volume of the patch, which just gives a nice, I think I've got it set for a 3 dB boost at home, probably bump that up for live use if you need to as well. And along the bottom I've got a chorus, I've got the King of Tone, and a Tube Screamer style pedal. So this all in all is pretty much everything I would need for a gig. I would use the chorus for like a fake Leslie kind of vibe, and the King of Tone and the Tube Screamer as my main drive tones, and then that boost up there would be my lead boost. The lead boost is also useful if you want to just give your clean tone a bit of a kick. The chorus I'm using, not so much as a chorus on its own, but more of like a fake Leslie kind of thing. I would have used one of the Leslie rotary models that the Helix offers, but this patch is pretty DSP intensive and I didn't actually have enough DSP processing left to fit the full Leslie model in. So I've gone for a chorus, just set with the speed pretty high, just to give a sort of Leslie emulation. It doesn't sound too much like a Leslie on its own, but in a mix with other musicians, you can't really tell too much of a difference. So that works nicely just to give a little bit of that Leslie swirl. For me in this patch, the real magic is the combination of just the standard clean tone with the clon and the compressor on. That gives you that nice kind of John Mayer, sort of Stevie Ray kind of vibe. That works really nice when you kick in the boost as well. You get that kind of just about to go over the cliff kind of clean tone. When it comes to drive tones, for me, the combination of the Tube Screamer and the King of Tone can't really be beat. So the Tube Screamer is a good place to start, so I'll kick that on, and I'll use the boost as well, just to show you how the boost interacts with the Tube Screamer as well. And then the same thing with the King of Tone. So I've got the King of Tone model there set pretty low on the gain side. It's very touch sensitive, so you can kind of dig in or play a bit softer. and you really get a nice dynamic range there. When you start stacking it with the boost and with the tube screamer, you get all kinds of different drive textures. So that's how I would use that patch with a single coil guitar. Now onto the humbucker guitar. So this is the Stanford Guitars Crossroad Marquee, obviously a Les Paul style guitar. Very much a semi-hollow, though it's super lightweight, lots of chambering inside with some vintage PAF style pickups. So it's got that kind of 50s Les Paul vibe crossed with like a 335 sort of thing, a really versatile single cut. So same thing again, I'm just going to play now, starting with my clean tone. I'm just going to stack different things on and off so you can hear how it sounds with humbuckers. So you can hear with humbuckers that tone actually starts to react a little more. I actually set the sag on all the amps quite high just to try and retain a little bit of that real amp feel. For me, that gives it a nice little dynamic that digital doesn't always give you. So setting that sag and sometimes the bias quite high within the amp model settings. This is easier to do with the HX Edit software. If you connect your HX Stomp XL via USB, you can sort of make the amps feel a little more realistic that way. Now, onto the next patch. Obviously, you can see I'm back on the single coils. So now we're going to go to a patch that I call Tweed Drive. So you can see on this one, actually nothing is turned on by default. This is a patch that I created to simulate that sort of Derek and the Dominoes style, really cranked Tweed amp sound. So the amp you're hearing in this patch is the US Small Tweed, which is sort of like a little Fender Champ style amp. And I've also got the 1x8 speaker selected by default, which gives it that nice sort of breaking up, sort of nasty fuzzy sound that you associate with those early Tweed amps when they're cranked up. Once again, the LA Studio comp is on at the end just to give it a nice sort of smooth and fat sound. And I've got a spring reverb as well, which is not assigned to one of the foot switches. On this patch, I've got 6 different foot switches assigned again. So let's start in the top corner. So we've got the simple delay. This is being used as like a slapback. Next up, I've got an Ampeg scrambler, which is a fuzz pedal. So the whole idea with this patch is to kind of go from Eric Clapton to Keith Richards to Neil Young to all those big sort of Tweed tone users. You could probably play some more modern stuff like Joe Bonamassa as well if you crank the gain a little bit more. So the Ampeg scrambler is acting as my sort of Keith Richards tone for fuzz. This foot switch here is once again assigned to a boost, so that's for my lead lines. I've got a 3 dB boost on the output. Down here I've got the Kinky Boost, which is like the EP Echoplex booster. I'm using that right at the front of the chain, and the whole point with that is to sort of just hit the amp a little bit harder. So when you play just the amp's standard tone with this EP booster patch on, it just gives it that sort of Tweed amp collapsing kind of sound. I've got the Klon here, the Minotaur, just for a sort of clean boost with a little bit of grunt, just to sort of push the amp a little bit more, and a Tube Screamer again, because why not? Everyone loves a Tube Screamer. So here's how the Tweed Drive patch sounds with nothing switched on. So this patch was never designed to really be a clean patch. It's always going to have a little bit of bite whatever you do with it, but the real magic happens when you start stacking stuff on. So my favorite thing to start with is the EP booster, because this gives it that collapsing Tweed amp sound. You can really hear that sort of fighting against itself. The same kind of happens if you put the regular boost on. But it's a little bit less extreme, and obviously you can stack those two things. This is quite an abrasive and quite a bright patch, so obviously it's not going to be to everyone's taste, but if you're playing that kind of early Clapton, Derek and the Dominoes thing, it works really well for that. You get the idea. Really good for that kind of cranked over-the-top Tweed sound. Now I do have the Minotaur, which is the Klon, and the Tube Screamer on this. They're not really essential for that kind of sound, but they do get you just some other interesting blues textures. So I'm a big fan of anything with a clon. And then obviously everyone likes a tube screamer. Obviously, as you stack the gain, you start to get into some slightly more aggressive sort of rock-ish tones, but it's a lot of fun. And the other thing I've added to this, actually two other things I've added, slapback delay. Always useful for playing this kind of stuff. You can kind of get into that Chuck Berry vibe. Obviously that's going to sound better with humbuckers, but also the fuzz. Now this is where it kind of becomes the Keith Richards thing. So Keith would obviously play small Tweed amps with different fuzz pedals or just different things pushing the front of the amp. You can again hear that sort of collapsing in on itself kind of sound. All right, back over the humbuckers now. So a Les Paul with PAFs into a Tweed amp is sort of that classic Neil Young kind of sound. He used a lot of old Les Pauls into Tweed amps, and again modern guys like Bonamassa as well. So they should get you in that kind of ballpark, and then we can layer up on top of that with some different drive tones. So that's a really fun tone to play with as a good starting point for that sort of aggressive bluesy rock. So I'm just going to play a bit more now. I'm going to stack in the different drive tones and the slapback. Actually, we'll start with the slapback, start with the Chuck Berry thing, and then we'll go a bit more off the beaten track. So the Tweed style tones are a lot of fun. They're great for sort of some biting, aggressive bluesy playing, great for some sort of, you know, if you're digging into that whole 50s Delta blues or classic blues vibe as well. Players like Albert King and Freddie King, they'd have also used some of those cranked Tweed tones. Now the third patch we're going to go to, I'm keeping this guitar for this one to start with, is because this patch is called Bluesbreakery. So this, obviously as the name suggests, is based very much loosely on that early 60s Eric Clapton Blues Breakers tone. So what we've got here is a JTM 45 style model, absolutely cranked, with a treble booster in front as the core tone. So the treble booster is actually the only thing that switched on when you first load up the patch other than the amp. We've got the LA Studio Comp at the tail end as well, just again for rounding it off. And there's a room reverb on this one to simulate a nice big studio room. I've also got an EQ at the end of the chain on this patch just to give it a little boost from about 500 to about 2.5K and pull down some of the extreme highs as well, because that early 60s Clapton tone is sort of quite focused. There's a lot of detail in the tone, but it's not super bright. So I've tried to achieve that by using an EQ at the end of the chain as well, in the same way that you would in a studio. You'd record it, it would pass through your compressors, and then it'd hit your EQ. Because that 60s British blues tone is very much a component of multiple things, not just the guitar and amp, but obviously the microphone, the signal chain, the desk it went through. So I've tried to recreate a couple of those different elements in getting this tone as my starting point, and then we're going to stack some other stuff on top. So this patch comes loaded with the treble boost already on. So obviously when you load it up, that will be on, but you can switch that off if you want. So the other things we've got here, this foot switch is once again a 3 dB boost for leads, or just giving it a push. You can adjust that amount if you need more boost or less boost. I think you can add up to about 20 there. These two foot switches are actually assigned to the same thing. So I've got a rotary here, the 145 rotary model, which is defaulted to the slow speed, and I've assigned this foot switch to be the fast speed. So this just acts as a speed for this. So if I turn this on, but this is off, this will default to the slow speed. And as soon as I kick that on, it will go to the fast speed. But if I want to load the rotary with the fast speed, I simply enable that one first. Then I kick this on and it automatically loads up as the fast speed. Along the front then, we've got the Tycho fuzz. This is sort of like the Tycho Brahe Octavia thing, just for your sort of Hendrixy vibes. Because we're using a Marshall here, we can look to Hendrix or Zeppelin or any of those other bands for some inspiration too. So I've got that loaded up just for some Hendrixy vibes. And then a tube screamer, because why not? No one used tube screamers in the 60s, but it's just one of those things. It's nice to always have a tube screamer on, especially when you're pairing it with a Marshall style amp. You can really get some interesting tones there. So here's how this thing sounds straight out of the gate. So you can hear straight away that kind of mid-focused, lots of attack British blues tone, and then obviously we can start stacking. Now you'll notice that's very, very touch sensitive. So I've got the treble boost on and the level boost is on, but I'm actually just playing softer and it cleans up. So that's what I like about this patch, is you can really get dynamic with it. You can obviously start stacking gains on top of that as well. So I've got the tube screamer. This is great for classic rock stuff, so if you're playing like Zeppelin and you want that little push of drive. That's probably about as high gain as you sort of need when you're playing classic rock, and bluesy kind of stuff, you don't want to go too saturated there. The octave I've added literally just for fun because, you know, why not? Love those octave up sounds. That's just one of my favorite tones. I love playing around with that kind of thing. Final thing is the two Leslie foot switches there. So if we engage this one, we're straight into the slow Leslie. This is really cool just for some chord progressions or just general swirly stuff. And then if you want to ramp up the speed, you simply just press the top foot switch. Cool thing with this is, like a real Leslie, you can actually set how fast it ramps up and down as well. I've just got it set at the default at the moment, but obviously you can time that to any tracks. You can tap tempo it, you can do all sorts of cool stuff with the rotary. The rotary also works really well when you start stacking it with gain. You can get some really fun sounds out there. Finally back to the single coils once more. So here's the patch, starting off with just the treble boost engaged, and then obviously I'll just stack some stuff as I play. So there you go, there is a look at the HX Stomp XL for blues and sort of classic players as well. There are 3 patches that I've designed, which, as I said, are linked down below, where you guys can check those out yourself if you want them, which look at some classic bluesy and sort of classic rock tones. Obviously, they're not emulating anything specific, but they are inspired by certain classic tones, as I mentioned throughout the video. Put each of those patches together with the idea of, you know, capturing a bunch of tones from specific eras or specific styles of blues playing in one patch. So let me know how you guys think these things sound, and obviously if you are a HX Stomp user or a Helix user of some sort, get the patches, try them out for yourself, let me know what you think. Let me know what your sort of favorite Helix tips and tricks are as well to get those really cool grinding blues tones. It's such a versatile unit and you can do so much with it, but I often feel that people really lean on the Helix for high gain stuff and super techy stuff. There's not enough guys leaning on it for some really kind of rootsy bluesy tones, but this thing can definitely do those things. And I think by adding some sag to the amp models, you can definitely sort of retain some of those characteristics and feel of real amps as well. But obviously let me know what you guys think about that. If there are any other topics or questions you'd like to see me answer in future videos about the HX Stomp XL, throw those below as well, because there's going to be plenty more videos on this thing coming up too. And while you're down there doing that, don't forget to hit the like and hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys very, very soon. Thank you for watching.